Hello everyone and welcome to yet another episode of Anyone Can Click, where we break down photography to its absolute basics 1 week at a time. Did you know that Apple's first iPhone started out as a top secret initiative called Project Purple? Steve Jobs took a major gamble by scrapping out the physical keyboards and replacing them with an all-touch interface. Now, critics thought that this was a very risky move, and yet this one bold move unlocked iPhone's revolutionary on-screen keyboard and changed the face of the smartphone industry as we know it today. This only goes to show that sometimes breaking the rules can lead to some extraordinary results. And while we will not be doing anything remotely groundbreaking in today's episode, we will look past the conventional norms and see how we can treat light, the most important raw material in photography, differently in order to click photographs like this one and this one. And speaking of phones, both of these photographs were clicked by a cell phone. On that note, without further ado, let's begin.
A super helpful on-field reference guide of today's session is linked in the description box below. Click to get your copy. However, I do recommend you watch the video till the end for the guide to make sense.
Like we did with the last two episodes, we are going to traverse this episode too in 4 parts. We're going to look at 4 key aspects of light, and they are quality, quantity, placement, and treatment of light. And we will see the conventional norms and what lies beyond. So let's begin with quality of light. Now, without getting too technical, it's important to understand the 2 most common kinds of light that we will end up photographing in. The first is harsh light. Now let me show you what harsh light looks like. Now, a harsh light creates hard shadows. It is unforgiving and it reveals all, including imperfections, which is why harsh lighting is not the best kind of lighting to use when we want to click portraits. And the best example of harsh light for you is midday sun when we photograph outdoors. But does that mean that there is absolutely no use of harsh light? The answer is no, because sometimes this very shortcoming of harsh light can become its biggest strength. So when you want to click that high contrast, dramatic black and white portraits, this is the light that you want to use. Now that we've understood harsh light, let's see what soft light looks like. This is what a diffuse light looks like. It is so much more pleasing to the eye, so much more aesthetic. It almost has this blurring effect, which is why it's the ideal kind of light to be photographing portraits in. Now, I converted the same light source from a harsh light to a diffuse light by using this device. This is called a softbox. Naturally, we wouldn't be carrying around this softbox when we are shooting outdoors in natural light, which is what we're going to be doing 90% of the time. But the good news is that the same diffuse lighting effect can be created outdoors by simply knowing when and where to photograph. So let's begin with the when. One of the best times to be photographing in the day is early hours of morning or evening during sunrise and sunset, which are popularly called the golden hours. Now, this is because of the lower position of the sun in the sky, which creates that diffused lighting effect, giving us those lovely sun-kissed portraits. Another conventional norm that we will be breaking here is shooting in overcast skies. Now, clouds are one of the most effective softboxes that are out there. They work by scattering the rays of the light, creating that lovely diffused look. So next time you see an overcast sky, do not be disappointed. Pick up your camera and head out, because you may actually end up with some lovely diffused portraits. Now coming to part 2, and that is where. This is a tip which is going to help you get that diffused light even if you're photographing in harsh midday sun. Key is to not photograph directly in sunlight, but instead photograph in open shade. So what is open shade? Open shade is basically the ambient lighting condition where the light is not falling directly on the subject and is instead bouncing off various surfaces. These surfaces can be buildings, they can be ceilings, they can be canopies of large trees. The idea is to look for places where there is a good amount of light and yet that light is not hitting the subject directly. Again, one of those things that lies beyond the conventional. But a word of caution here. There is a difference between shooting in an open shade where there is still a good amount of indirect light versus shooting in the shadows where the amount of light is actually too less to give a good photograph. At this stage, understanding this much about quality of light is more than enough, so we're going to move to part 2, which is quantity of light. Now, one of the most popular conventional norm is that more the light, better the photograph, and this is not untrue, but it's only half the truth, because sometimes what's even better than light is spotlight. This is one of my most favorite techniques, and you will find it in a lot of my photographs. In fact, there is a quote that perfectly encapsulates the sentiment. If you want something to look interesting, don't light all of it. So the technique we're going to use is selective underexposure. The whole idea here is to underexpose the frame and let only certain parts of the frame be illuminated. This creates a natural point of interest while creating dramatic photographs. And this doesn't mean that an evenly lit photograph is going to be uninteresting. The idea is just to understand and know what other possibilities exist in order to create frames that stand out, that look different from one another. Now coming to point number 3, which is placement of light, and this is one of the most effective ways in which you can tell a story differently. Now, what do conventional norms tell us? That the subject needs to be facing the source of light, which is true, especially if the source of light is diffused. But is that the only way to do it? The answer is no. Because sometimes when you change the position of light, you give yourself the chance to tell the story a different way. Silhouettes, rim-lit photographs, and backlit photographs. Let's briefly take a look at each of these cases and see the technique which goes in to create them. A silhouette is an image where the subject appears completely dark or black with no visible internal details contrasted against a brightly lit background. Here, the subject's outline becomes the main point of interest. Rim lighting occurs when light from behind the subject creates a bright outline or halo around the edges, separating the subject from the background. And a backlit image is when the light source is behind the subject, but unlike the silhouette, the subject retains some visible details and textures. For all 3 situations, the light source is behind the subject, and in case of rim lighting, even at a slight angle to the subject. For both silhouettes and rim lighting, we need to underexpose. But for backlit images, we need to dial in a positive exposure compensation to get some of those details of the subject. Sunrise and sunsets provide an excellent opportunity for silhouettes. Rim lighting also works well in harsh light. It is accentuated further when the subject has a textured edge like hair or fur that catches the light beautifully. Backlighting works well to create some dreamy portraits. Now that I have shared some examples that are clicked from the digital camera, I'm also going to show you one other photograph that I clicked from the cell phone. This here of my father with my son is one of my most favorite photographs. It is a silhouette and it captures the moment that evening beautifully. This only goes to show that in order to click silhouettes, you do not really need an expensive digital camera. You can also do it very effectively from your phone. Now we come to the last part, which is treatment of light. Now we've already learned that light enters the camera through the aperture, through the open shutter curtains, and it is at these 2 points that we can control the amount of light and how this light is treated. Let's look at shutter speed first. Now, conventional wisdom tells us that we want a fast shutter to freeze a motion. But when you go beyond conventional wisdom and you decide not to freeze the motion, but to free the motion, you can end up with photographs like this. Now, the first one is a moment in time, but the second one is a memory. By using a long shutter speed, I have infused movement into a still 2-dimensional photograph. I'm instantly transported to that one morning on the seashore with the sea waves lapping at their feet. And both of these photographs, like I mentioned, were clicked using a cell phone camera. Now let's take a look at aperture. Now, conventional norms dictate that we use a wide aperture, we use a small f-stop number, create that lovely shallow depth of field, that lovely subject isolation, and all of that is perfectly true. But once again, what happens when you go the other way? Take a look at this video, for instance. Notice how as I increase my f-stop number, as I decrease my aperture size, the source of light slowly starts to become well-defined to create that lovely sun star. Now this is another photograph where I have used a very small aperture size, which means I've used a very high f-stop number to create that frame a different story. With that, we have reached the end of today's video on light as a compositional tool. While it may not always affect the arrangement of elements in the frame, it most certainly will influence the entire process. If you have found this video useful, if you have found the tips and tricks that I shared handy, please do like, subscribe and comment. It greatly helps the channel. Definitely leave your feedback in the comments below. I will see you in the next episode where we will start a new chapter of autofocus, another very important aspect of clicking a good photograph. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.